Good morning, everybody, and happy New Year. Welcome to 2025. That we're going to be doing, there's going to be a lot of changes really with the channel. I have experimented with a different format on how I do these lives. Like instead of just sitting at my desk, I have created kind of like a YouTuber, like academic shelf behind me to provide a more interesting background than just the wall of my home office. And I'll probably also be recording stuff out of the studio, but things like live chats and videos that require me to read a screen a lot probably don't make sense for me to record out of a studio. So I figured I would mix it up a little bit. So yeah, that's one of the things new things start. And like the top row are some collectible mechanical banks from the turn of the century that my grandfather used to collect as a hobby. And the one on the right is actually a more leather bank I bought when I went to India. And then the middle row are books. Well, some are finance books, some are other ones, but they're books I've read over the years. And the bottom left corner is my favorite strategy board game, Diplomacy. And for those who have not tried it, I recommend it. And then also the other thing is, what was I going to say? Is for this theme for this live stream is it's going to be general Q&A, but we're going to focus more on goal seeking and how to Funko Pops. Yeah, I don't think that's not really my personality, but I will maybe add like, I don't know, statues or more mechanical banks or other things I get from or new books or things from my travels to share. I think the example of a guy who does a good job with this is JJ McCullough. And the other thing is, yeah, with the mechanical banks, I have some other ones too, but they might be a little bit too un-PC to put on YouTube. And maybe if I get to 50,000 or 100,000 subscribers, I'll test out the mechanical banks live. And then so that's kind of just about the background. The other thing is what inspired me to do this goal setting. I read a book recently called The 3 Laws of Performance, which I highly recommend if you haven't had a chance to. And it's a book that kind of it uses examples of international businesses that struggled during turbulent times in their development to figure out like how can you become more just effective and how can you get to the bottom of problems that are not super obvious but are unspoken. And really, like, I'll just spoil it, the book here, and I might clip this actually as a 1-minute book review. The 3 laws of performance. The first law is how people perform correlates with how situations occur to them, which generally means for like, if you feel like a situation is going a certain direction, you're going to take the actions that will deliver that. So if you think, oh, whatever I do is going to fail, then it's more likely to happen because you're going to self-sabotage. The second law of performance is how a situation arises in language. So the rhetoric that people discuss a certain situation has a reflexive effect and creates the reality that the language implies. And the third law of performance is future-based language transforms how situations occur to people. So if you can change the narrative, you could change the actions. And what this goal setting is, what you're trying to do is basically apply these laws of performance to set the narrative for the time period you're setting the goals for, which in this case will be 2025. And so the thing is, let's start with my goals. I'm going to just go into my professional goals because I have goals in my personal life, but I'm going to keep those kind of private. But my main goals for my professional life is I'd like to get the assets under management of my firm be 4 to 5 times higher than they are currently. The second goal I have is I would like to have this YouTube channel break 100,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. So I'll have a silver play button added to the shelf. The third goal I have for 2025 is to make the Analyzing Finance with Nick tour as successful as possible. And I mean, the way I would define success is that I go to a bunch of cities and I make valuable connections and we fill up the venues. And yeah, it ends up being a worthwhile experience for everybody. So those are kind of my three professional related goals that I'm going to share on this channel. Uh, and so with that, like the way I would put this is that I have to just, that the language is just like, think of it as kind of a sure thing, but it's just more of how I'm going to do it. The other thing with goals is that you generally want to set hard goals, because if you set easy goals and one hard goal, your brain is gonna just naturally go follow the law of least resistance, and it's just simply going to be, oh, look, I'm just going to do all the easy goals, so I check off 8 of the 10 lists on my checklist. So I was like, oh, I did 80% of the things I want to do this year, but you did the easiest 80% that you probably would have been able to get done anyway, and you avoided the 20% of the hard things that you really needed to do. uh, I used to do this. I used to write these big long checklists, and I would have one line for everything. And I did this for several years in my 20s. And I always get about 80 to 85% of my goals done. Usually I average about 82%. And what I noticed is kind of like it looked like an SEC football schedule where I essentially just beat all the cupcakes. But any time I did anything that was super challenging, I would just not start it, or I would put it as somewhat of a half motivated effort and not get it done, because I give myself the false sense of accomplishment of racking up the wins, and versus actually making the real changes I needed to do. And that's what a lot of us do. It's like those fighters in boxing who are like, I don't know, 27-2, but the 27 people they fought were like junior rec league boxers, and the two were the only real professional fighters they fought were the two they lost to. Doesn't mean anything. So you gotta, I don't really recommend putting on your goal list things that you're likely to achieve anyway. So if you're a good student in school and you have a 4.0 GPA and school naturally comes easy to you, don't put getting straight A's as a goal, because that would be just kind of pointless, because you're going to probably do it anyway. And whereas you really want to do are things that are going to push and challenge you. Uh, and then, yeah, so James has a counterpoint to this, is that would it be better off just to stack up easy wins and confidence or harder wins? It depends what stage of life you are. If you're like a teenager in high school or you don't have that many wins in your life, yes, that could be it. But to develop an initial set of confidence. But the thing is that their easy wins ultimately are not fulfilling, and you also get complacent, and you're like, you like the fact that you only believe you can do the easy things makes you lower yourself to saying like, this is the best I can do. So I think it can work both ways on this. Uh, but that's kind of my opening preamble on the goals slide. So I think in the meantime, until we get more people here to ask questions, I'm either going to just kind of go over the previous questions that are in the chat right now, or I can list some of my, which I wanted to do in the last one, but I didn't have enough time to do it, and I didn't have my notes ready, was listing fellow small to mid-sized YouTubers and large YouTubers I watch for recommendations on other content on this platform. Because I know some of you guys have asked me about that as well. So that's another thing we can do while we're still doing like the initial onboarding. And then, by the way, if you have like more finance or economics questions that we may not have time, some prioritizing the goal seeking questions in this one, feel free to leave a super chat so that I can make sure to prioritize your questions, because I used to answer all the questions when this channel was a lot smaller, but I get overwhelmed, and a lot of people have really great questions, especially in the last Christmas live, that I just didn't see until I read the live chat replay the next day. So if you want to make sure that I see them, feel free to ask me on super chat. So let's see. Another question I've got is, what is a good source to learn about options? When it comes to options markets, there are two kind of primer books that you should read. The first one is Natenberg on options, which is just kind of the Bible about the intro of options trading, like what are options, how they work, what are the basic option strategies, etc. And then there's the more complicated book, which is Dynamic Hedging by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which is the look about how to vol trade and delta hedge and a little more sophisticated things about options. So that is the other book to read, but that one's really hard. Like, it took me to read it 2 or 3 times to really understand it. And I don't really consider myself to be an unintelligent person. So if you feel a little bit overwhelmed when you first read that book, don't take it personally. It's a tough one. But those are if you want to learn about options, start with those 2 books, and then you can grow from there. The other thing I want to ask you guys too is about the sound quality. I've been getting a lot of critiques on recent videos about my microphone, and I have a new Blue Yeti. I bought it actually at the beginning of 2024, so I had it for a little less than a year now. And people still, I've used OBS to fix some of the ambient noise and things like that. So I'm not like an audio engineer, and I did buy like a clip mic, which I'm going to start using for when I'm recording from the studio. And like, if you guys have suggestions on how to actually make my equipment work, because I went and bought the good stuff supposedly, it would be helpful, because it's kind of frustrating that I feel like I need a PhD in audio engineering to just do something as basic as have decent sound quality for people with the headphones. But enough really with that rant. Let's get back to this. Can I learn and make money on options as a normal person with a full-time job? I mean, the dynamic hedging level options trading, that's something people do for a living. It's a career. I mean, I never really traded options much until I started working at options firms. So it depends how much time and resources you're willing to put into it. Like anything, like if you put the amount of time and effort into it, like say I put into this channel, even though it's not my full-time job, then perhaps you can do it. But just as something you do like a few hours a week, in the long run, it's probably not gonna work out for you. That's my opinion on that. What do you think about Nassim Nicholas Taleb? I think that he is a very bright mind when it comes to options and tail hedging and analyzing things from that kind of framework. I think he tries to overly integrate his Lebanese heritage into some of his writing, where it really makes it just sound overly academic and not and a little bit superfluous, to be honest with you. And he sometimes has a hard time taking criticism when people challenge him on X. But in general, I think, and in his books, probably can be condensed to a lot shorter than they are. Like, the concepts in his books are good, but he doesn't need to have made them as voluminous as he did. I've read Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, and I forgot the name of the other book that he did, but I think I read that one too, about the trilogy of like these books about risk philosophy and then dynamic hedging. But I think in terms of what I learned the most from it, probably was dynamic hedging of his reading. So that's my thoughts on. And then there's also the concept of Taleb's turkey, which I've talked about on this channel a lot, particularly on the iceberg of finance, which is the idea that a Thanksgiving turkey, their life quality and their weight goes up consistently from January 1st to the second week of November. And then when the head gets cut off and it becomes somebody's dinner, it drops to 0. And that's a good analogy for selling options or just vol selling behavior in general. Yeah, that's a good quote, James. How do you make a small fortune? Start with a large fortune and trade options. Or you can also, another one would be like, start with a large fortune and invest in in private equity that's not very well vetted. But yeah, or private, or like or in restaurants. But yeah, there are some people who have made money in those too. But yeah, you just gotta be careful. Like, I generally recommend, if you're going to go in the world of speculation and you're young enough that you want to pursue it professionally, that's probably the way to do it, versus like as a side hobby, unless if it's money you don't mind losing everything, because a lot of people do lose everything when they speculate. And also, just as a disclosure, nothing I say in these videos is investment advice. Please do your own due diligence and research, and or hire an investment advisor. Skin in the Game is the third book. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. If you were to go into an industry now with your knowledge, what would you do? Like a different industry, or would I stay in or a branch of finance? Because that's kind of two different questions. And also, what are my goals? My goal to maximize profit and just make as much money as I can to go the fire route, or is it to enjoy the quality of my life? Because those are also really two questions. Why is 100K the hardest amount of money to save a middle income and below standing point? I don't think that's true. I don't think 100K is the hardest amount of money to save. I'd say it's probably closer to like the first million is the hardest to save. Because even if you get to 100K, there are certain expenses like a down payment on a house, or like paying for a wedding or something like that, where you're going to wipe out a big chunk of that pretty quickly. Like, so like $1 million is the level that, like, once you get there, and assuming it's outside of a retirement account and it's in something more liquid, short of very bad management or buying money management, or buying a very expensive piece of real estate, or starting a very high capital intense business, you're likely not going to drain that down to zero, just from normal lifestyle purchases or just normal life stage events. And so I think savings in general gets harder up until then. And it gets easier for them, because once you're at $1 million, getting a decent return, say like a 5 to 10% return on your money every year, is the same as a middle class salary, essentially. And that's when it starts to compound, because your money starts to really work for you in a way that is actually material. Like, if you say you have $10,000 and you have 5% return, that's $500. That's not really going to make a dent in your personal finances. And the power of compounding is there, but it's not as strong as it would be on a much larger base number. So your question is that the 100K is hardest to save. Well, I think it's probably, I think that true number is true in like 1990. But if you adjust for inflation today, I think it's closer to $1 million. But the reason is, it's you're drawing down often, especially if you're younger, to finance basic life events, like such as marriage and children and buying a house or things like that. And usually it's not really growing and replenishing itself faster than you could draw out. That's why it's hard to save at lower levels. Yeah. And then let's see. Is working for yourself the only reasonable way to hit $1 million below the age of 40? That's one of the ways you can do it. I mean, you can move up fast on the office politics institutional ladder. Like, if you're a corporate executive or you work in high finance, you can make that level like 500,000 to $1 million a year at a private equity shop or a hedge fund or an investment bank, or upper management in a corporation. If you can make it that, and you can make it into there in your 30s if you're really talented and you went to the right schools or had the rights or are very good at networking. So I mean, if you change that number to 10 million, then yeah, I think entrepreneurship might be the only really way you can do it. But for 1 million, there's still ways on the corporate ladder you can get to $1 million in savings before 40. And then let's see. What are your views on factor investing? I only invest in ETFs, but I target a market beta 1, which is exposure I can get, the value, profitability, momentum. I'm actually doing a lot of research on factor investing right now, so I'm still shaping my opinion on it. So I'm not going to really go into too much detail on that one, just because of the fact that my opinion, is not fully formed. Um, and yeah, um, and in terms of 1 million savings, that includes investments, whether you're buying stocks or investment properties. So like it's not just $1 million just sitting in cash. So that doesn't make that clear. Um, yeah. Is going to elite college worth it for an entrepreneurship route? It depends what kind of business you want to start. Um, you if you can make a lot of good connections, like you see like the founder stories of a lot of like major businesses, and they met their business partners oftentimes at business school or at the high prestigious undergrad that they went to. So it can be helpful in that way. You have more access to capital because alumni may be more willing to help you or make the intros to the people who can give you capital. Um, and there are certain schools that are maybe not as prestigious, quote unquote, but have good track records of training entrepreneurs. Like my school, UC Santa Barbara, is one of them actually. They have really good entrepreneurship programs. Technically part of the engineering department, but it trains entrepreneurs, and there are some multiple large publicly traded companies that have come out of that, and or large Y Combinator startups that were acquired for 9 figures or more. So like that's one example. Another one is Babson, which is kind of the reputation of being in Boston as the entrepreneur college. So um, that's another one. Is a good reputation. Berkeley, Berkeley is considered very prestigious, but Berkeley, UCLA, um, I've known for having a lot of founders come out of those schools as well, even though they're not Ivy League. Stanford, of course, but Stanford is de facto really Ivy League in terms of level of prestige. So yeah, it's like there, and University of Virginia has a really good business school too on the undergrad level. So and UNC, North Carolina, Michigan, I'd put in those categories. And there's probably others that I haven't really mentioned, but there is there like you want to. There are schools that have reputations of encouraging startup culture and developing entrepreneurs, or like just helping people move up in the ranks. Like if you really want to be an entrepreneur, you should look at not necessarily the general US news rankings, but the business school rankings, undergrad business school rankings, uh, or schools that they had a culture of startups coming out. Um, and I see a client from the UK, so I don't really know how it works out there. I mean, a lot of the entrepreneurial Europeans I've met intentionally either did a semester abroad in the US or tried to go to college in the US for that very reason. Like I met a lot of Scandinavian people and people from China and India and Spain, Portugal, all over Europe too, who came to American colleges particularly to learn entrepreneurship and business. Like that's kind of one of the most common things that foreigners, when they want to get education in the US, that's the one thing they want to learn because our country is good at that. So that's yeah. Let's see. Can you do a video on taxes and how the super wealthy may use welfare through tax avoidance and tax deduction? I did several videos on taxes recently, like which one is the best tax. It wasn't that well received in terms of views, but I released it, I think, like the first week of December. So we want to know what the pros and cons of each tax system and which classes benefit and which ones lose. I did talk about that already. And people asked me about the H-1B. I talked about that on the last live stream that I did shortly after Christmas a few days ago. The first 20 minutes of that live is all about me talking about H-1Bs. So I'm not going to repeat myself here. Generally, I think you should have an opening for the most talented immigrants, but you cannot abuse the system to use it for cheap labor. That, if I could put my view in one sentence. Let's see. All right, I'm going to scroll through some of these questions. But the thing is, like before, since this is the live stream, I try to do it for you guys. Would you rather have me talk about general Q&A? Would you rather have me do goal seeking related discussion and talk about how to like accomplish your goals more, like we now that we have like a enough people to make this like a full discussion? Or do you want me to do recommended shout outs to other YouTubers and like what are some of the other content I watch on this channel? Please write in the comments what your vote is on this. And speaking of um, votes, we have our tour coming up. I'm actually going to be in San Francisco, of all places, tomorrow for the Analyzing Finance with Nick tour, our second stop. If you haven't registered already, please do so. I have a link in the description for that. And then I'm also having one in San Diego on the 11th, which is in a week and a half, next Saturday. And then we're going to have one here in Laguna Beach, California, city next door to me, on the 25th of January. So if you want people in LA and Orange County, that's the one you want to go to, is the Laguna Beach meetup. So we're having those. And yeah, now let's see. A question is I have here is, will Europe catch up to the US in the next 20 years? Or is it over for Euro bros? How do you see countries outside Euro, like Switzerland and Norway? I mean, I'm more optimistic on Switzerland than other countries in Europe because they have a more well-managed government and they allow more permission for innovation and generally a more free market society. I'm biased because I'm Swiss myself, so take that with a grain of salt. I think Europe is going to have to do radical structural reform, and I think Europe will come back eventually. The question is, how bad do things have to get before Europe makes structural economic reforms? Like in general, millennials and Gen Z in Europe are more right wing than their American counterparts, but that's mainly more due to issues on immigration. But if they adopted a more pro-capitalist worldview because they see that the certain system isn't working and that they cannot sustain with their demographic pyramid, their welfare states, and they make real reforms and they pivot on that way. And I think if things got bad enough in Europe, they will change. It's just how much tolerance do Europeans have for putting up with a relatively weak situation and seeing their performance of their economies being lapped consistently by the US and them being on the risk of being passed up by East Asia and even Latin America. If the trends keep going, like countries like Chile and Mexico will have higher GDP per capita than places like Italy and Portugal and Spain. And eventually there'll be a point where they say, I had enough. And they like, and instead of providing regulation, they provide innovation. But how long that's going to take, I don't know. But I think it eventually will happen. Okay, so let's see. That's all right. So okay, so goals. It seems like most of you guys want goal seeking and some of the shout outs. So I'll do some of the shout outs and then we'll start with goal seeking. So yeah, for YouTube channels, most of the ones I'm going to talk about are not finance related because I watch some other finance YouTubers, but I feel like I have other sources that I read to get finance news. So like I focus my YouTube consumption on other types of content, like starting with some smaller ones. A good one about psychology is Animus. It was Mark Darian is the guy who does that. And I think that's good if you're looking about like emotional management and psychology. Another one is Florida Man Diplomacy. I'm starting with like the really small channels. They're a YouTube channel that coaches you how to play this board game here in the bottom left corner, Diplomacy. So if you want to learn about the fundamentals and how that works, it's kind of foreign policy in a game. That's a good channel. My friend Christian White has a very small channel, but it's a good podcast where he interviews the local business community in Southern California and talks about like how they built up their companies and what lessons can be learned. And then another one, if you want like just an ambient like while you're just trying to relax or something. There's one a YouTube channel called Wave Rider Drones, which is like drone photography for people surfing in San Diego and Orange County. Uh, I like that channel quite a bit. And then for a more finance oriented one, there's a new podcast that my friends Tony Greer and Jared Dillian started called the Macro Dirt Podcast, which I think sometimes they branch off a little too much into non sequiturs like baseball, but in general, they do a good weekly summary of like what's going on in the markets from like a more technical trader perspective. So that's the shout outs I'm going to start with. And now let's go on with do you know any great Forex traders? Like, yeah, I know people who are good at trading Forex, but they're not exclusively Forex traders and they wouldn't call themselves Forex traders. And they're also generally people who are not public personas. So I don't think they want me to mention their names. Um, so that's my answer. Yeah. Why do you think pro athletes go broke? Um, I think a lot of it has to do with private equity speculation. Like they'll invest in their cousin's restaurant or their brother's bar or their sister's gym that they want to start. And those businesses are very high risk, especially if you're not like a seasoned professional doing those kind of things. And they have high fixed costs. And so if you do a few of those, you can lose your money real quick. A lot of them also feel like they owe like handouts to their friends and family who are much more disadvantaged than them. And then there's also they think that their career is going to last longer than it is. So they lifestyle spend in a way that they expect their high income to keep going when it really doesn't. And then there's also just mistrustworthy agents or bad financial advisors that sometimes skim money off the top and don't really add value or actually sometimes outright steal from their pro athlete client. And then the other real concern is some of their vices and bad lifestyle choices that since they grew up in them oftentimes in a class environment that the consequences for these weren't as bad, that they don't have much to lose. But like a lot of people have lost their wealth due to things like addiction or creating broken families or gambling or other things. And so, yeah. Um, Expos fan? No, my favorite baseball team is the Angels. However, like I don't the Expos stopped being a team like in 2004, and I thought it was kind of like a ironic thing to have an Expos hat when I just didn't feel like wearing an Angels hat, and I thought it was like kind of cool to have, and I like the logo and the color scheme, the way the hat is, and whenever I travel to like other parts of the world, French Canadians when I wear that hat would often walk up to me and said, "Hey, thanks, you made my day for wearing the Expos hat," and yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of like the closest thing I am to being a hipster is having my Expos hat in a way. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if maybe things don't work out for the A's in Sacramento or Vegas. Maybe they should bring back the Expos. But yeah, I think it's also kind of cool because even though it's like they're an American sport, they seem to just like a more like an international type team because English is not like the first language there. So yeah. And then what else was I going to say? But that's kind of my comments on the Expo hat. What are my thoughts on Dubai? Dubai is a very low tax place. Um, it's very kind of like don't ask, don't tell in terms of certain types of business practices. And so therefore you see a lot, and especially dealing with certain countries that are not really friends with the West. So it has that element. I think it's kind of like the vibe is like it's the Las Vegas of the Middle East. I mean, it's a little bit more socially free than the rest of the Gulf states, and so people like to go there for that. I wanted to go there when I was younger because of all the crazy architecture they built, like the indoor ski resort and the sail hotel and the islands that are shaped like the continents of the world. and the Palm. But as I've gotten older, I've lost interest in going over there. Um, I haven't been yet. Maybe if I had enough of Dubai audience, I would do a fan meet up there. But it's not on the top of my travel list right now. But it's on the list. It's just there's other places I think I'd rather go first. Uh, and yeah, and also as an American, um, I don't benefit from the tax situation being an expatriate Dubai. Like say if I was a European or from some other country. Let's see. All right. What red pill Twitter people should we be following? Do you mean like red pill as like manosphere or just red pill like people who are just going to open up your mind to things generally? I generally don't think it's productive to do follow like manosphere people. Like, I mean, I've probably wasted some time doing that in my 20s, but like it's there's better uses of your time than doing that. Um, but like that's my view on that one. So my answer is I don't really recommend any of them. Um, will you go to Zurich? Yeah, I will. I'll probably go there this summer. Actually, I'm going to do a fan meetup in Switzerland, maybe two. Probably one in Geneva and one in Zurich. And if there's enough of you in the Italian side, I'd like to do one in Lugano too, because Lugano is my favorite city in Switzerland, even though my heritage is more on the German side. Um, yeah. So yeah, go start a business or something. It'll teach you how to be a man quicker. I like that quote. Um, yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is kind of red pilling in the sense that everything is on you, and you learn a lot quicker about just how to deal with things when everything's not handed to you, and it's not you don't have like the perceived stability of the education system or corporate America. Um, do you agree with Peter Thiel when he says that AI has passed the Turing test? I personally think it hasn't. Um, I'm not really sure. I have to think about that. Oh yeah, Jackson 5, congratulations on becoming a member. So now I've kind of got sidetracked a little bit, but let's get back to the goal setting. So I've been setting goals basically every year of my life since I was in 8th grade. So now that's been a while. So I have a lot of experience with this. And I'm going to try to use the rest of this live to kind of coach you guys into how to be the most effective at it. First, you should have a 10-year plan if you haven't done one already. And you should update it maybe every 8 years. And the reason why is because you don't just wait till 10 years is because sometimes you may have accomplished a lot of your goals early. And you should just check these once in a while. I have a 10-year plan written on my laptop. And you don't have to check it every day or every week, but checking it once every year or two is probably enough just to see like, one, have your priorities changed since you wrote the 10-year plan? And two, what stuff have you hit and what stuff have you not hit? So like, for example, probably my 10-year plan I wrote, which the last one I did was I think in 2021, I had really no expectations for this channel. So like, I don't really have I didn't have really any YouTube related goals because I didn't really expect this to really be anything. And if I wrote a 10-year plan today, it'd probably emphasize more of the content here on Analyzing Finance with Nick, because it's now something that has become more of a priority over the years. So that is the view of that. You have a 10-year plan. And once you have the 10-year plan, you then can say, like, think about what steps does it take for me to get to the goals in the 10-year plan. So then and based off of that, you write the hows, and then you have to figure out the estimation of how long it's going to take to do each of the hows. and then you use those as the bullet points for the 1 year plan. Like, what can you realistically do in the 10-year plan and a 1 year plan? So say, for example, I want to build a company that has $1 billion of assets under management within 10 years. Realistically, I'm not, unless if like a bunch of family offices call me today and be like, hey, we all want to put in $100 million in your wealth management firm. Where can I sign the check? Well, I'll have a meeting in Dubai or in Zurich and take care of it this week. That's not realistic. But like, it takes time to build a business. Like, I'm well short of that level now, and I've been doing my business for about a little less, about 2 years since 2.5 years since I took on our first client. And so, but there are certain steps I can do in year 1 and in year 2 and in year 3, so that will set up the foundation that by the time it is year 10, I could hit that benchmark. The next question, do you plan realistic or heightened expectations goals? The other thing is you got to do, which is going to sound a little paradoxical, is you need to let go of certain timelines. Like, I remember during the pandemic, I had a certain goal. By the time I hit 35 years old, I would have $5 million in the bank and have a house in Newport Beach and be married with 3 children. And I was nowhere close to that during the start of the whole lockdowns. And I knew that some of those goals would be delayed because of that. And I was really stressed out. I was like, what kind of failure I am for not hitting X, Y, and Z goals. And they were very unrealistic goals too, that I really think about in retrospect. And so I was like, you know what? You have to let go of the timeline, but not the end. Like, you have to know, like, at the end, this is where I want to be, but you can't say like, oh, I need it to happen by X, because you'll pressure yourself. You'll make hasty decisions. You'll take unnecessary risks to try to hit this goal by the arbitrary deadline, even though if you do it the right way, you can get there in a little bit longer of a time, but in a probably higher probability. So you got to like, there's just, if you try to rush things, and I try to do that a lot in my 20s, which is always just rush. Like, I want to hit these things now because there's no point of not hitting the goal by a certain age unless you're too old to enjoy it, or whatever stupid excuse I had. And that is going to sabotage you, is trying to rush things and it's the same motivator of financial nihilism, except for high achievers. It's the high achieving version of financial nihilism. Like, I got to get these goals done by a certain time or else. And that causes issues. And you have to you need to make sure that you are dedicated to the full process, but don't really worry about when it's going to hit. Like, Jeff Bezos had a really good quote about this. I don't remember what it is exactly. That's why I'm not going to read it. But I generally have that kind of view on that. That's another thing, is you just got to make sure. So, but you have the 10-year plan, not necessarily that you have to hit these by 10 years, but you need to know where 10 years is long enough that if you really dedicate something to it, you should be able to get there. Unless if your priorities change. Yeah, there are no bad goals, there are bad timelines. That's a good quote, by the way. So that's my answer to that question about realistic goals. Another question. I was recently diagnosed as neurodivergent. I read that you're neurodivergent. Well, if true, do you mind briefly talking about how it's created challenges and advantages? Yeah. When I was a kid, I was diagnosed with autism, and I didn't even talk from the age of 1.5 to about 3. And I was in special needs school till about 4. And like, I kind of snapped out of it. And later my parents told me that it was a false diagnosis, and which may or may not have been true. But the fact that, like, if you have a kid who's neurodivergent, you really don't want them to believe that they have some sort of disability, because if they do, then they're going to have self-limiting beliefs that will self-perpetuate, just kind of like the language in the 3 laws of performance we talked about earlier. And the fact that my parents conditioned me to say I was not disabled in any way when I struggled with anything, it just motivated me to either work harder or figure out that I had to fix it because I could. There was no really limitation. Um, and so like there were benefits, but like and then I later in life went to to psychotherapists to discuss certain issues I had in my early 20s, and they came back to the Asperger thing, and I probably have some of it, if not just a very high functioning form of this being on the spectrum. So, but there, and it helped explain why I struggle with certain things that normal people did not um, struggle with in their childhood. Like I have probably social skills that are a little bit less developed for my age, to be quite honest. Like uh, it took me probably about 5 to 7 years longer to learn certain social skills than other people would at the same stages of their life. And that made it harder to make friends. It made it harder to develop relationships, especially in high school and college. Uh, so yeah, that's those are kind of social things like reading people's tonality, body language, unsaid things like there's like what's said, but there's what's really meant. That stuff was always hard for me. I had to read a lot of books. I read several books on social psychology, and I took a lot of classes on it in college, even though it wasn't my major or my minor, just to kind of learn this stuff so I can apply it and have an understanding of it. Um, and so that those are some things that I've had to deal with. I've probably been um, a little bit naive in certain things and like had to learn how to learn who to trust, who to not trust, stuff like that. Those are things that it's social skills, like in general. So were the things that it took me a little bit longer to develop. The strengths is that I was much more intelligent than most of my peers in terms of raw brain power and capability. Like I knew how to read. I learned how to read at 3 years old, for example. Uh, I coasted mostly through my elementary school. I skipped sixth grade because I passed out of a lot of the tests. Not really the whole year, but I didn't do that much because I had already kind of finished. I already had like above that level of talent. But then the fact that I was lazy that year kind of hurt my academics in middle school and high school. So it can kind of be a double-edged sword. Like if you have a gifted kid, you got to make sure they're perpetually challenged because if they get complacent, then it's going to really screw with them later in life. Because you've probably seen it on Reddit, like the X Gate kids or the X Gifted subreddit of all these people who are supposedly had a lot of potential and talented, but rested on their laurels too early in life, and as a result, they never really achieved what their potential was. Um, and Then the other thing is when it comes to that is that I'd be hyper focused on specific topics. I'd find something I'd be really interested in and I'd learn everything I can about it. And then once I'm done, I just move on to the next one and don't bother to learn a piece of it. And like, this is how I analyze thought leaders, like whether in economics or other fields. I read everything about them to the point that like I have like a chat GPT like mentally in my head. Like if I ask this person a question, I could probably predict how they would answer it. And once I get to that level, I can stop reading anything from them or watching any of their content because I already know what they would say in every hypothetical situation because I've kind of understood their framework. There's some exceptions to people who are more adaptive and change, but in general, that's a good way to kind of learn about a thought leader or a philosopher or really any expert in a given field. Like the example of this, when I was in first and second grade, I was really obsessed with dinosaurs. And so I read every book, I watched every video, cassette tape, or every TV show, and I went to dinosaurs. I went to any natural history or dinosaur related exhibit that was within 100 miles of where I live. And yeah, I had this obsession with it, and I could basically remember every sort of fact related to dinosaurs up to about the year to the late 1990s. And basically, and I know zero about any developments in paleontology after like the year 2000 because I just moved on to other things in life. But that's like an example of how your brain works with these kind of things. Hopefully, I didn't go a little bit too personal into that one, but um, those are kind of the pros and the cons. The pros are that you're able to learn things and focus a little bit more on stuff you're really interested in. The other thing is that people who are on the spectrum are very bad at lying or like being like, I guess masking isn't the right word, but like um, not about like just kind of like hiding the intentions in a way. They tend to be just extremely honest to a fault, and that has hurt me to a certain degree in my personal life. And um, yeah, however, I think on the net, I'd rather be somebody who I think it forces me to have integrity in a way, but uh, I think it's a net still probably a good thing. Uh, and then, all right, so now we're gonna get social filters. Yeah, I learned the hard way. Almost every kind of social faux pas I've done at least once between the ages of 16 to 32, and that's how you learn of that. Um, yeah, and then high IQ can lead to a lonelier existence. There's a book that Aaron Clary wrote called The Curse of the High IQ, which goes into some of that. I don't agree with all of his takes on it because you can find other high IQ people if you look hard enough. Like it's not I mean it's kind of like class in that way. Like people of certain intelligence levels tend to congregate with each other socially if you are willing to put yourself out there. Especially in the age of the internet, it's a lot easier to do that. So that's where so I don't think you are destined to be lonely if you have higher IQ, especially if you live in a major city world in the globe. Like there are plenty of other people like you. Um, let's see. Um, and then back. So let's go back to goal seeking here. Um, when it comes to goal seeking, like so you have your 10-year plan and you use that as the action steps for your 1-year plan, and then you have to think about and you already decide like what stuff like if you have to first think about what stuff you're naturally going to just you're already on the path to, and what stuff you're going to have to do the deep work to build the path to, and you need to emphasize more on the stuff that you need to do the deep work to steer you the right way, because if you don't do that, um, then you're just going to naturally drift to the stuff that comes easy to you. And you can waste a lot of years just checking off the cupcakes and not really accomplishing what's hard. And if you have a tiebreaker on what goal to prioritize, pick the one that scares you the most, because that's probably one you actually need to do. And then the other thing, really, too, is you don't tell people your goals publicly. Um, Unless if you're trying to mentor people, like in this case, like I am. But assuming you're not trying to do that, you generally don't want to talk to your goals publicly because you get the false sensation of feeling like you've accomplished something just by saying you're going to do it. Especially the more people you talk about to it about, the greater the false sense of accomplishment is for that you're going to get. So you generally want to keep your goals private. However, if you have a struggle with accountability, you can always find like an accountability partner. A sibling is good for this, or a close friend that you basically say, hey, look, if I don't accomplish this goal, I have to write you a check for an X amount of money, or you get to use my credit card to donate a certain amount to a social cause that I personally detest. That's a more extreme way you can do this. For those of people who I know who are very struggle with motivation, that's the most effective way. It's like you can do it is say, hey, look, you don't want to have your name tied to some cause that you hate that you donated $500 to. You better get what you said done. And then also the other thing is that you should set your goals not based on results, but on actions. Like instead of saying, for example, I want a goal to make $1 million next year in sales for my business. Instead, you would say, I will set a goal that I will contact at least 500 qualified prospects. Because if it's something out of if your goal is something's primarily out of your control, you're just going to get depressed if it doesn't work, and you're going to feel you're going to adopt learned helplessness. Where if it's action based, then the accomplishment, you can do it just by taking the right steps. And usually, if you take the right steps, you will get the success, even if it takes multiple attempts at doing that. So that is the other really thing I recommend, is that your goal should be based on specific things you can do more than a specific result. So instead of saying like I want to lose a certain amount of weight, you can say, hey, I'm going to eat a certain diet for a certain amount of time and have a minimum amount of steps walked and go to the gym a certain amount of times, like in a month. You're more likely to succeed because you have like a more tangible thing to do. So that kind of is my thoughts initially on goal seeking. If you have, and I'll take questions really from this point forward, or just other questions in general. And I'll probably keep doing this live until until I feel like stopping it. But yeah, let's see. One guy's asking me about dating advice. I'm going to save that for the Valentine's Day February live stream. So I'm not going to answer any questions related to that on this one. Give me a second to scroll through some of these. I'm sitting a little bit farther from the screen, so it takes me a little bit longer to read these. Are you good with math and statistical finance? Do you use agent-based modeling? For a finance guy, I'm probably average at math. I'm probably better than like the general population. I mean, I run basic Excel sheets for a lot of things, and I can do statistical analysis, but yeah, I'm not running like super advanced multivariate regressions or quant models or anything like that. That's not what I do. I've never really been that. Why did you not go into STEM? I did not go into STEM because I looked at the amount of work in school versus the reward in terms of the careers after, and also what I wanted to do for a living. And STEM didn't really serve my goals. I wanted to be in the business world in some way, shape, or form. I always knew that. I didn't really know I wanted to specifically do finance until my second year of college professionally, but I knew I wanted to go more that direction. And so if I didn't really no interest in like doing things with like engineering, a lot of it is like precision, like with your hands and calculus and math, and that type of math I wasn't very good at. And I knew it would be very challenging to struggle in terms of like not really suited my skill set and my level of focus. And I was like, I didn't want to do it. My brother studied engineering in college, even though he ended up going in the business world because he just wanted the academic challenge. And I give him credit for it. He's the only one of my siblings who actually did a hard science STEM degree and did great with it, even though he didn't really do that for his profession afterwards. But I just didn't really think like I wanted to enjoy my college, but also learn something that was going to be useful for my career. And given my career goals were more in the business world, I focused more on economics and finance. And then after my second year of college, when I did the internship with the family office, I kind of realized that I wanted to be in professional finance. And so far, I definitely didn't need to do a STEM. Yeah, that's kind of, it just wasn't really aligned with what I want to do. Would I have preferred homeschooling? Well, homeschooling back when I was in my childhood was not very popular, and it was very stigmatized. And I don't think my parents really either had the time or the inclination to want to do homeschooling. So like, I don't think it would have worked out that well. I mean, if I was growing up today in the same situation, maybe I think I probably would have preferred homeschooling. What I would have probably preferred is like something I would maybe want to do whenever I have a family, is like a pod type system where you have a bunch of parents of multiple families cooperate of like mind and like values, and you hire teachers that kind of can help propel your goals. Like, I mean, in an ideal world, like if I was born into old money, I'd want like my Aristotle style tutor and just have my education that way. And I would just learn the things I'm interested in and go at whatever pace would be lined up with my aptitudes. And I think that the high school system honestly should be finished at 17. People have a year to do stuff and then start college at 18. Like, I think a lot of it is dragged out intentionally because a lot of parents work and they can't, and they want their, and I think the school system kind of is extended daycare to a certain degree, but I think that's going to drives it out. And so I think the school year and the amount of hours per day in school could be shortened drastically with no deleterious effect on actual learning results. What do you think of responsible use of ADHD drugs? I've never used any of them. I'm not ADHD. I have really no, I have no comment on that. What do you recommend for someone looking for their A team? Accountant, lawyer, financial advisor, etc. That is a really good question because I'm trying to help build like an A team, like that people, or a series of A teams, depending on what region of the country you live in, that like if you contact me and you need, say, like a good accountant or a good estate attorney or a good business broker or investment banker or something like that, that I would know who you can go to. And for the wealth management, that's what I do. So I don't really need to find people for that. But yeah, it's a challenge. I think a lot of it is referral. Like you have people you trust and ask who they use, because usually a lot of people, particularly more experienced professionals, have gone through more than one of these and they will know who's kind of trustworthy, and don't just take them for granted. You know, like if they refer you somebody, like, why do you use this person over another person? Ask them straight up. And that usually, and based on that answer, you can get a good idea of whether this person's really a good fit for you, or is fitting a certain niche need, or is there some other relationship there that doesn't really affect the quality of that given professional. Yeah, it's not really like something like a restaurant where you can simply look up on Yelp. Those businesses are a lot more personal in nature. And so you're going to have a different approach. Can the North American labor force recover? Everyone in Nigeria and Cambodia has a high school certificate and speaks English. What can North America offer the global economy? I mean, it's not really just simply speaking English and doing basic clerical work. That's not America's advantage. So like, where our advantage is technological innovation, it's financial innovation, it's capital, it's natural resource access, it's the entrepreneurship culture. Like, North America offers a lot to the global economy. We are a big exporter of food. We are a big exporter of weaponry. We are a big exporter of financial services and technology and energy. Those things are the most valuable assets in the world. And that's why the US has such a strong position, because we're one of the top providers in the things that people need the most to survive and thrive. So yeah, I think that's the answer to that question. What point does it make sense for a Henry professional to be in contact with a wealth manager? I think generally when you have, first of all, paid off all of like your high interest debts, like your student loans and things like that. Step one, if you have them. Step two, when you are either have hit a certain asset balance, say for example, you own a bunch of restricted stock or you sold a business and you have a liquid net worth above 500,000, that's a good time to contact an advisor. Not when you do it, because a lot of people will come out of the woodwork when they see your name in the news for something like that. More just when you know that's like a year out or a year before that is when you start to contact the advisor. Or when the other way is when you hit a certain savings level, like net of your taxes and personal expenses, that you are ready to invest in a more serious level than just throwing in an index fund. I generally put that mark starting at about $3,000 a month net of net of all of your taxes and living expenses, and consistently saving that amount every month minimum, and oftentimes more. At that point, that's probably time to start contacting advisors. So it's either when you get a big enough lump sum that investing really makes a difference, or when you're saving enough that after a few years of compounding those savings, you're going to hit that level, that lump sum very quickly. So that's the answer to that question. Let's see. Is the lower class of America headed for third world level? No, not quite. People who ask those questions generally haven't been to the third world. I don't really think it's not really in the best interest of anybody in society to let sink that low. And there's enough opportunity out there that even like on a minimum wage job, you're not going to live in a third world level. I mean, the only way that would happen is if you had such a large amount of low skilled immigration that the wage scale just gets clobbered. But given the way that the political trends are trending, I don't really see that happening either. I did comment on Marco on the H-1B schism in the live stream I did 5 days ago. Let's see. Are you also interested in people with different skills than economics, finance, and law? Yeah. I mean, it's useful to have networks for everything because people are going to ask you stuff and even within those, like there's CPAs who are, say, a good example at real estate that I'll refer for people who need a real estate focused accountant, or ones who are good at handling estates, like inheritance. And so like you leave them sub niches within those niches. But to answer your question, yeah, like I've been part of like my local chamber of commerce for a couple of years now, and I've met people in all kinds of businesses. And I always keep in mind who they are, and I take notes on what they do. So if I find somebody who needs their help, I can make that introduction. And yeah, you're going to need things for other things. Like if I ever build a house, I'm going to need an architect or a contractor. And so I have made contacts in those spaces. For my health, like I know people in the fitness world who I trust, like whether it's nutritionists or personal trainers or people who own gyms, like that, I would need for that kind of thing. So yeah, you want to know other small business owners and professionals because you never know when you're going to need their particular services. Would you need them to necessarily be like, would you recommend them to your clients necessarily? No, because your clients may know better than you on those types of things. But for your own sake, it's good to have those connections. And it's hard to know who trust, especially in an age of like fake news and other types of issues when it comes to like conflicting information on the internet about what's actually true and what's not. You want to find professionals who have similar people who are professionally qualified and trained in what they do, but at the same time have a healthy dose of like the same kind of skepticism or that you have, so that you know that like these are people who kind of get where you're coming from, but they can call you out and say like if you're believing in a stupid conspiracy theory, because they have the professional qualifications and the education and the expertise to know whether something is legitimate or not, even if it because I think a lot of mistakes, people will just default trust people who line up with them ideologically, even if they may not actually know what they're talking about on other parts of the world knowledge. Like we live in an era that you cannot know everything. Like the last person to truly know everything was John Stuart Mill in the 1830s. There's just there's more knowledge produced in data every year than like the entire world history of knowledge in 1900 or maybe in 1950. So yeah, you can't really count on your own expertise for everything in the modern era. Have you commented on the advent of AI we received? Yeah, with elites and the counter elites. I did a video about it. It was the one that came out a week after why old money supports the left. It's about how AI will affect social class and will it destroy the working class. So I did that video in September. So if you want my full thoughts on that, I recommend watching that. How much money do you have to earn to own a 120K Porsche? And who is your favorite economist? Well, I mean, in terms of like 100, what you should have to own a 120K Porsche, uh, it depends on what your other finances are. Like, is your house already paid off? Do you have, do you plan on having a family, or are your kids already grown? Because like if you're somebody who's like a retiree who's already saved their money and already have their house, like you can have a much lower income and justify buying that Porsche. Whereas if you're a young person, you're going to need that money for other things. And you need to build up that savings and reserves, and you need a much higher amount of money to justify that Porsche. So, I mean, I would say, to be safe, I'd probably say $500,000 a year would probably to justify that. Like, I mean, for lower middle class people, like your car probably can be worth maybe half your income. It's probably a good benchmark. Like, if you're talking about cars above $50,000, then you want it to be a much lower ratio. Like, the more expensive the car, you should be making a bigger multiple on the value of the car. Like, that's kind of my view on it. But I haven't really thought about it as that much. And yeah, you're welcome, Marco. I wanted to try to do an earlier time because I know I usually tend to do these at about like 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, which is too late for my audience in like Europe and the old world to watch. And so I wanted to do one of these that I can include some of you guys in it because, and also normally I don't have this time of day available, but it's New Year's Day and it's a holiday. And so I figured I would try to do something a little earlier in the time to have compared to my normal ones, which are usually going to be weekday evenings when I do these live streams, because that's just most convenient for my business schedule. And also that's when most of my American audience is more available. Let's see. What is your opinion on the Polish economy and its stance on illegal immigration? I think the Polish economy is doing really well. Like, the GDP per capita in Poland, I think recently has passed up the UK, which is both an indictment on the state of the United Kingdom, but it also means Poland is doing something pretty well. So yeah, Poland is one of the economies I'm more bullish on in Europe generally. I might do an economic future of Poland video later this year, especially if I do go to Poland for part of the Analyzing Finance with Nick European tour that I would ideally like to do this summer if I have enough European audience who would like me to come visit. The places that I already have in mind for Europe, which I'm going to go for sure, is Switzerland. But outside Switzerland, I'd like to go to Italy for Jubilee 2025. For those who are Catholic, I think you guys know about Jubilee. For those who are not, it's kind of a special celebration goes on in the Catholic Church that's only once every 25 years. And a lot of the events take place in Rome. And 2025 is the next one that they are doing. And so it'd be cool to kind of have a Jubilee type meetup for all of my subscribers who are interested in attending Jubilee or who live in the greater Rome area. So if any of you guys are watching this, that'd be a fun one. Let's see. How did you make your decision to start your own practice in wealth management? I have a goal to start my own CPA firm, but I'm not sure how to plan for a transition out of the larger firm now. With CPA firms, like it's different. Like in my industry, in the investment industry, they're very strict about competing, and you can't really manage money on the side for your own clients while you're working at a bigger firm. But for CPAs, is that the same or is that different? Because depending on that is how I would approach this, to be quite honest. Because like if it is allowed, you should just kind of just try to start finding clients now. And once you're at a certain level, then you can feel comfortable going on your own. If you can't do that, then you need to build about 3 years of living expenses and savings and have enough like competence and expertise from years working at the big firm that you know that you can provide something good to your clients. So that's like the key. It's like if you try to start a business straight out of school, even if you're like the smartest guy on earth, you don't have enough really effective work experience to start a practice because you just simply don't know what you don't know. And you need to know that you are at least as capable as your old firm or um, and or like people of like who have like like 10 plus years of experience doing what you're doing, and then you can go out and do it. um, so that's my answer to your question on that. I'm going to scroll up and read some of these um, questions. And yeah, this is also the market's closed. That's why I'm able to, I will not be ever doing live streams during market hours for obvious reasons. Let's see. At what age did you start studying economics and finance? It was something your parents taught or fostered in you at your age. My grandparents were the ones. My grandparents are from Switzerland. Finance is really part of Swiss culture, even though neither of my grandparents worked in finance. And so they were the ones who taught me like the stock market and the basics of real estate and a lot of other stuff and saving money. They bought me books about what interest works like, as like picture books as a kid that talk about how saving money in a bank and how interest rates work and things like that. So if I had to say there was a family members who influenced me, it was my grandparents on my mother's side who were really into, and I learned entrepreneurship because my father was an entrepreneur. And so that's what got me interested in that. But I started reading finance books and business related books seriously, like when I was in middle school and high school. Like I read Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was 15 years old. And it's not really a great book in terms of actual tangible strategy, but it's great in terms of like setting a mindset. That is, and I watched Jim Cramer's show when I was in high school too. And I stopped in college because of his Bear Stearns call. For those old enough to remember that, I think you'll know the story. But then it's then I just kind of took off from there. And what I learned from working for the mentorships and internships I did in college was that I could actually do it for a living, because I thought it was just something I'd have to have some other profession and then save enough money so that I could manage my own money independently as my retirement. Next question I have: do you envision what your eventual retirement would look like for you? I'm referring to retiring from your career job and doing something else, whether it be traveling more, golf, etc. Yeah, I've had mixed views on retirement. I'm probably somebody who could retire because I have a lot of divergent interests. Like finance is not the only thing I'm interested in this world. And so I could pursue plenty of other like second career projects if I really wanted to. However, like it's going to probably be a while for my retirement because I have certain goals in my personal life that are not super cheap to do. Like I don't really want to live a fire life. I don't like the idea of perpetually depriving myself and living on the bare minimum just so that I can retire as quickly as possible. I had that view. Like I actually had a fire like philosophy before fire was cool. Like when I was say like from 15 to 20, before I realized I can actually manage money for a living, because I wanted to not have to have a boss. And I thought every job was just like the movie Office Space. And if you have that, it goes back to the book I was talking about the 3 laws of performance. Like the narrative you create is what the world you create. And the narrative I created is that every job was like living in the movie Office Space. And so I had this mindset I had to do fire. And when I realized there's actually jobs that can pay well and that you actually like to do, then the urgency to retire early dropped big time. And so that's kind of how your priorities can change over time with these kind of things. So my goal is not to retire as fast as I can anymore. And most entrepreneurial people generally don't have traditional retirements. Like retirement is usually an employee thing. Like when you can scale, and also if you're a business owner, you can scale down your business, or you can delegate and hire people to do the stuff you don't want to do. So you can scale in and out your involvement as much as you want. Like my dad is the example of this. Like he's probably never gonna retire, or he's gonna retire at a relatively old age, but he can kind of turn the knob on how intense he wants to be involved with his business, or how many clients he wants to take on at a given time. So he can be more flexible with his schedule in his older years than he could when he was in his 30s and 40s and 50s. So that's why entrepreneurs don't really retire in a traditional way, because, and also a lot of them start the business because that's what they like to do, or they just don't have enough hobbies. Like my grandfather was a doctor. He practiced medicine until he was 89 years old. And the reason why he did that was because he didn't really want to play golf all day, and he didn't really have very many other hobbies, and that's just what he wanted to do. He wanted to practice medicine. And when he retired, he was basically kind of forced to retire at a certain age, because I mean, at 89, you can only do so much as effectively as a doctor at 89 years old. And he died within 2 years of his retirement because he was on this earth to practice medicine. And that's why a lot of men should avoid retirement completely. Like, I'm not saying like you don't scale down your work hours, but you shouldn't just be completely check out and retire necessarily, because if you do, you have a risk of just dying early. Like this is what happened with Paul Bear Bryant, for example. Um, he died a few weeks after his retirement from college football, and it's very common. A lot of very ambitious people, they die shortly after their retirement because they just don't have the motivation to get up in the morning anymore. Or if you're not in the arena, it's like a big now what moment. So if you are going to retire or scale back, you first need to think about the now what. Like, what would you do after you scale out for your main career? Because and it can't just simply be playing golf or sitting on the beach. You'll get bored of that fairly quickly. And if you're married, you're probably your spouse will probably be bored of you sitting on the couch too. So you got to come up with something. You got to have some other calling. You got to be out there doing something. And so for me, like back to what I would do, like I don't really plan on quitting my wealth management firm anytime soon. I'm probably going to be doing this for at least the next 25 to 30 years. I mean, things could happen, but that's kind of my plan for now. What would I do post? Let's just say like somebody came to me and called me and said, "Hey, I will buy out your company for $1 billion today." I mean, I'd be a fool not to take that. Even with all my business partners, my cut on that would be a very sizable amount of money that I wouldn't really need to practice my business anymore. So let's just say, for example, I got acquired, and I had my earn out, and that's all done. What would I do next? First, I'd probably use my money that I make, and I'd probably call up my business partner and be like, "Hey, let's just start a family office together and manage the money just for our friends and family, and not have a business for it." Because that's what a family office is. It's basically, if you have enough of your own money, you either hire investment professionals to manage it for you, or if you worked in Wall Street yourself, you can just do it yourself. And there's really no mysticism beyond that. That's essentially what a family office is. So I would run a family office, but that's not going to take me all day, all the time. I wouldn't want to do a trading strategy that's intense. I'd still want to do other things. So I would do a few things. One, I would probably go more aggressive on this channel at this point. Like, I would spend a lot of money to upgrade everything I do with this channel. I would probably hire a marketing person or a PR person to help recruit people who I'd want as guests to show up on the channel, and or get me onto other platforms that I've always wanted to be on to discuss certain things, and just chat with interesting, like-minded intellectuals. Maybe they're not even finance people, just who I thought would be interesting. I think I would want to do like a public intellectual type life, where I'd speak as a keynote at conferences and maybe write some books, and like share my ideas, kind of like a straight version of Peter Thiel in a way, would be kind of like my second life as a public intellectual. Maybe I'd get involved in some political things, maybe not. I've also thought about being an academic, but like I would just be like a guest lecturer at a local university, and my class would just be basically me rambling about whatever I want, but it would kind of be in the broad niche of economic history or something like that, because that's what I would be talking about would be history or economics, most likely, or finance, and get maybe a PhD in history or something. Like I could see myself being like the more practical business version of like a Niall Ferguson. Like that would be kind of like a fun retirement. And I'd probably travel more too. I've traveled a lot, but I'd like to go to some more places and do certain things I can't do at home, like whether that's like going to certain sporting events in different places, going to trying golf courses, going to mass at all the cathedrals in different places, joining like local intellectual discussion groups and talking to the local business leaders about the things going on in the world and different perspectives in different parts of the world. I mean, that's kind of, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. And I'd probably pursue more of my hobbies aggressively. I'd probably play more competitive tennis. Um, I would try some other hobbies that just take a lot more time commitment that I have right now. I mean, I see golf a lot, but I don't golf that much because I just don't really have time to do it, given all the things I'm doing on this earth right now. Um, so yeah, that's what I would do as a mix of things. But yeah, that's kind of my retirement. I know that was a long question, so I've got a lot to um, scramble on. Um, let's see. Um, what's it called? Yeah. Do you think as a young person it is better to travel or invest your money? It depends how cost effectively you can travel and where you travel and why you travel. Um, I think that I learned a lot from traveling, a lot more than what I spent on it. Uh, I lived in other parts of the world. I gained a very good education doing so that I wouldn't have gotten just in a classroom or working at a desk in a city in America. But if you're traveling just to get pictures on Instagram and random tourist traps, no, it's probably not worth it. If you go with like, if you have more of an intentional type of traveling, then yeah, I think you can learn a lot. But you got to have like a reason. And you should do also when you're young, you'll have the chance to travel, because when you're older and you only have like 2 weeks a year or 3 weeks a year, you can take off and maybe you have to use one or two of those for family occasion. It's a lot harder to go to these farther away places, like whether it's Latin America or Europe or Asia or Africa or Australia. Um, and if you have a family, it's much more expensive and much more difficult to travel while you have a family. And yeah, but if you're traveling just to like see random sites and to party, that's probably not the best use of your time. But there there's a lot to be gained. And I think everybody, if they have the means to do it, should do leave the country at least one or two times during their college years, either maybe a semester abroad or like a trip during their summer, just to kind of get themselves out of their existing paradigm. You also you learn a lot more who you really are and what your real values are when you're at a place that has a contradictory values. Like when I went to India when I was 19 years old, that's kind of when I learned what my real like beliefs are and values by going to experiencing a firsthand a culture that is the exact opposite of the one that I grew up in. So hopefully that answers your question. Um, yeah. Um, let's see. Um, and then also, like, if you have a lot of money and no experience in the world, you're a lot easier you're more likely to be a sucker and taken as a fool by people and have that money parted from you. Like you kind of again, like human experience is often worth more than the cash. Like example, it's like there's a quote that's experience is the best teacher. When you lose money in the stock market, that's paying tuition. It kind of goes into it. There's kind of that mindset. But yeah, I think the answer is both. You should be saving aggressively and traveling, and you should spend less on frivolities at home. That's kind of my answer. Like less on certain stuff that you probably don't need, like in terms of materials, consumer goods, or nightlife, or yeah, like that. If you're gonna cut, like the way I was able to afford traveling was because I didn't, because I cut, because I stopped. I never really drank, and so I created a savings account when I was in college. If any money I would have spent on nightlife related stuff, I put in that savings account, and that helped finance a lot of my traveling. Um, let's see. I'm gonna go scroll through some of these questions. All right. Any people update on why people are having so few children these days? Okay. So the birth rate question. And again, I'm not going to be able to get to all these questions. So if you want to ensure that I answer it, please do a super chat, because there's a lot of good questions, and you guys chat a lot of these, they're asked quickly, so I don't have a chance to get to all. But in terms of the birth rate issue, I don't think it is really an issue for reasons I've said in multiple videos. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people aren't having kids. I think the main one is economic, especially in the developed world. Like the average cost of a 3-bedroom house in a job creating city is simply too high. And so as a result of that, people don't want to have kids, raise kids in apartments. And if all you can afford is a 1-bedroom apartment, you're less inclined to have kids. And the house is just a proxy, generally, just that the cost of raising kids is more than it used to be. And that discourages people from having families. So that's reason number one. Like if you saw the cost of 3-bedroom houses, suburban houses in major metropolitan areas plummet, I think the birth rate would skyrocket. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is there's certain priorities. There are certain cultural priorities that people just care more about their own personal material well-being and less about for having a family. Because having a large family results in sacrifice. I grew up as the oldest of 5 kids myself, and I could not have some of this, even though I had a pretty good life, I could not have some of the same material comforts as kids who are from 1 or 2 children families whose parents have the same income as mine, because there was only 1 or 2 of them versus 5 of us. So I had to learn to share more. I couldn't have like certain things on my own that a lot of people from smaller families were able to take for granted. And even if it wasn't a material constraint, there's also just, I had to learn to get along with other people at a younger age, because I had to deal with having 3 sisters and a brother at the house all the time, and having a lot of cousins and other things like that. So, yeah, and then there's just the time constraint. Like if you have 5 kids and you want to have, for example, one-on-one attention with all of them, that takes a lot more time and effort than it would if you just had 1 child. And some people just work longer hours today, or they want to prioritize their own pursuits. And if you don't want to make the sacrifices needed to have a large family. And then there's also a religiosity component. Like less religious people tend not to want to have families. And then there's also the component of marriage declining, because people just are afraid of getting divorced. And because of that, they don't trust marriage. And if you're not going to get married, you're less likely to have kids. And yeah, so I think it's economic. It's mainly economic, but there's also other priorities. I personally would like to have a large family when it's time. I don't, but the thing is that I have to probably have to sacrifice some things on the material side, no matter, and or time priority, no matter how financially successful I become, because that's just the nature of parenting. Any good rule of thumb for choosing travel destinations? It seems like India, for example, suggests that the more distinct, the better. I would say in terms of travel, thinking of that, like I I have a second channel called Nick AF, which I haven't posted in years, but I thought about turning that just into like my travel review and recommendations channel, because my favorite non-economics, non-finance thing to talk about is geography and travel. Like, speaking of shout outs, like some of my favorite YouTube channels are geography ones. Like, I think Geography by Jeff is really good. Geography Now with Paul Barbado is really good. And Geography King with this guy named Kyle are three of my favorite channels on YouTube, because I just like learning about where things are and why things are the way they are, and how different places have different climates and cultures and histories and things like that, and why cities are located in certain places. Like, I think it's kind of a shame that a lot of people in our country, the US, can't locate all the states on the map or all the major cities. That I think geography is a very underrated thing in terms of our educational system priorities. It should be prioritized more. Uh, and I think it should be done in the lower grades. Like, I don't really think it's that being a geography major in college is not that useful, but it's something that should be taught at the elementary and high school level a lot more than it actually is. Any good rule of thumb for choosing, but back to the point, any good rule of thumb for choosing travel destinations? Yeah, I mean, first, it depends on what is, I think the first place people generally should go, if you're, I'm using this from an American perspective because I'm primarily in a country of immigrants, you should go to the country of your ancestry first if you're international, if you haven't been already. There's kind of a homeland feel that you get just like deep in your bones when you kind of go to those, and you kind of learn about, like, in a deeper sense, like your family's origins in a way. And you can see like the difference if you're from like an English like settler country like the US or Canada or Australia or New Zealand. You can kind of see the difference between like what makes you American, or the country, the new country you are, versus like the old country, because there's a lot of cultural things that you've brought over and biases that you might have that you might not understand why you have, and that might come from your upbringing from your original country. You don't even realize it until you go there. Or the other way around, like you realize, oh, I'm very American. Like, for example, I'm Swiss. I've gone to Switzerland, and in Switzerland, people don't wear shorts. And people obviously could tell I'm American because I visit in the summer and I would always be wearing shorts. And that's just one like kind of example. But I would say countries of your heritage is a good first start. And then depending on who you're traveling with too, like, and who you are, like, I wouldn't recommend, for example, like young women going to emerging market countries alone. It's not safe. Like, I would not recommend, for example, people going to like countries that are, if you're somebody who has a budgetary constraints, going to Monaco or Switzerland, because they're very expensive. So it all depends also on your individual situations too, and how much time you have. Like, if you have only 1 week to travel, you probably want to go someplace geographically closer to where you are versus if you had 5 weeks. Like, in general, you need to spend, I would say, at least 1 day for every time zone above 3. So, like, if you're going 4 or more time zones away, you need to spend, like, at minimum that number of time zone days probably per time zone, just because so you get acclimated. And like, if you're making that much of an effort to go that far, you might as well get like the full experience out of it. I mean, I've done trips shorter than that for personal reasons or business reasons, but I generally felt like the trips were kind of too short as a result, and I didn't really maximize the experience. So if you have the time commitment, you can go further places. And then you also like to go places that, um, if you also, it depends on your level of exposure. Like if you're from like a gateway city like a New York, and you're very exposed to international cultures, and your family took you on trips abroad when you were a kid, you can maybe be a little bit more adventurous with where you travel than somebody, say, who's from middle America and has never really left their home state or region. Then you might need to do something a little bit less exotic so that you can kind of get your feet under you. So that influences it too. Like I generally think that a good first trip, places that, and it really depends, like good, like also on political environment, geopolitics, other things as well. But I don't know. I think I like one of my, like a good first place to go, I would say would be, um, either East Asia or continental Europe are probably good places to start. Like probably continental Europe. If you're from a Western country, continental Europe is probably because they don't, it's different enough. Like they don't speak your same language, and there's different foods, different customs, and things like that. Like, but it's similar enough that you're not going to get lost in translation like the Bill Murray movie. Like it's still using the Roman alphabet. Like I recommend for your first time travelers to go to places that use the Latin alphabet. If you're from a country that uses that, or if you're from a country that uses a different type of alphabet, you should go to a country that uses your type of writing. Now you not necessarily speak the same language, but you could see like the same like sentences or the same words after a while, and you could catch on to what that means to help you navigate around, and that helps too. And so, I know some people who won't travel to a place they don't speak the language, and I think that's kind of a little bit closed off, especially if you're an English speaker. Usually, you can meet and find other English speakers most of the world. For people who don't speak English, it's a little bit tougher. But probably people who don't speak English aren't watching this channel, so my advice probably doesn't really apply to them on that sake. But yeah, I mean, also places where your money can go far enough that you're not gonna like have to like skimp on everything and not be able to do the main tourist attractions. So there's no point of flying, for example, say to this very exotic place on the other side of the world, and then once you get there, you have no money to like actually do any of the things you want to do there because you spent it all on the flight and the lodging. And then um, and then also like if you're younger, like if you're under 25, you can maybe do the hostel thing in like Europe. That's the other thing. Like continental Europe's a good start because the dollar is very strong right now against the euro. So you have that going for you. It's fairly safe. So if you're a young person who doesn't have a big budget, you can stay like at a hostel or something. And it provides enough of a different experience that you'll gain something out of it. And um, then the next level, if once you've already done continental Europe, then the next level will be East Asia or Latin America, particularly the southern cone of South America. Um, I think is a very underrated places like Argentina, Uruguay, Chile. Um, they are some of my favorites. Um, and so that's another, I would say, um, play like those are like level two. And then level three would be like Southeast Asia or like North Africa or like or the Caribbean, I would say. And then beyond that is like the more real exotic stuff. But and there's also certain places that make sense for different budgets. Like I don't think I would go to some of the more like I wouldn't go to like sub-Saharan Africa on less than say like a 5-star budget, just because of some of the but whereas other places I can go on a much more affordable like budget. So it's a lot of it really kind of depends. Hopefully that answers your question though. I rambled a lot about that. Um, yeah. Okay. Then let's see, American here, been living abroad for for years now and barely ever in the US. Travel is easy, assuming you have a highly technical remote job. Highly recommend Southeast Asia because it's also super safe and cheap. Yeah, Southeast Asia and India are the most affordable places I'd say to travel in terms of like how afford food is and hotels and things like that. And the weather is always like summer. Um, yeah, those places do often offer a culture shock to some people from the West that they might have to get accustomed to. That's why I don't recommend them as like level one travel destinations. But once you've done the basic stuff, yeah, you can go visit Southeast Asia. I've been there multiple times. Um, when I was and I had fun. But yeah, good comment. Thanks for the super chat, by the way. Um, what's your opinion on passport bros? I'm going to talk about that on the probably the dating live stream, but um, I generally don't think it's a good idea. There might be certain people where it does make sense, but I think that you're probably better off having the trying to find somebody closer to home. But I have my reasons why. I don't really want to. It's a nuanced conversation. Uh, yeah, and there are some people it works good for, but let's see. Oh, Orange County Inc. That's what that book is. It's about the history of entrepreneurs in Orange County, California, and how this area was built on the backs of some very interesting businessmen. I think it's out of print right now. Otherwise, I would put it. I would have put it in the book list. I think I did put it in the book list, but there was no link because I don't know if you can still buy it. But it's one of my favorite coffee table books because it's kind of like two of my favorite things: entrepreneurship and Orange County. So, yeah. Um, let's see. Um, all right. I'm probably going to do this live for another like 15 to 20 minutes. So, because I have other things to do for the day. But feel free to put in some of your questions while I am scrolling up. And then let's see. Yeah, I missed a lot of comments because I went through a lot of these. Thanks, JR Spock, for coming back to moderate. So there's like more comments than questions here. Let's see. Sorry for slowing down here. I'm just trying to scroll through these and see if there's any question I feel like answering here. All right, you want to visit additional countries when you're going to China at a wedding. Yeah, I mean, I think Japan is worth visiting. Tokyo and Kyoto. Kyoto is the more medieval, historical side of Japan, and Tokyo is the more modern side. I would probably do both of those cities if you're going to go to Japan. Singapore is pretty cool too if it's not too far away. Singapore is kind of like the best mix of like East and West in Asia, and it's got a lot of cool modern Marvel tourist attraction type things. But it's also got a lot of traditional Asian culture as well, and I think it's the best food city in Asia as well as Singapore. I also liked Hong Kong. I don't really know where in China your wedding is, but there are other parts of China that are probably worth visiting as well. It also depends on how far you can travel distance wise. Thailand is more for beaches. Same with Indonesia. Like Bali, if you like to surf, is great. But if you're not into surfing, I would not recommend going to Bali. Uh, and then like yeah, I'd probably say for recommendations, I'd say my top ones would be Japan and Singapore. And if you're into surfing, then Bali would be number 3. Uh, let's let's see. How will QE inflation affect the boomer exodus? What do you mean by that? Um, that like inflation is already here, and it's probably I think it might delay retirements because you need more money to save for retirement than you used to because of the whereas I in the Navy, no, I've never been in the military, but I have a lot of friends who are in the military. My grandfather was in the U.S. military, and my uncle was, and I respect those who serve. Thank you for your service. Um, is ethical to retire young and have if you have a rare and valuable skill? Yeah, you can do what you want. Like, are you putting your best use for the world? No. Are you probably optimizing the quality of your life? No. But there's nothing unethical with retiring at a young age if you can afford it, assuming you're not living off of the of others to do it. Um, yeah. What's it called? Yeah. So, and then for traveling too, if you're Americans, don't forget exploring your own country. Like prior to the pandemic, I didn't really see enough of America itself. I spent most of my traveling in Europe and Asia. Um, and the US is very diverse. Like we all speak English and use the same currency, but a lot of the states have greater differences than European countries have to each other. And seeing, especially if you go like region by region, like the Mountain West is a lot different than the Deep South. And I would recommend doing, I think everybody, if they have the time to do it, should do a road trip across the United States or a specific region of the United States because you'll learn a lot more about how the other people live in your country, especially in the age of hyper political polarization. You gain a lot of perspective by seeing the different regions. And it's not just a political thing, it's a cultural thing. Like I may like even if my politics is the same as people in different parts of the country, their cultural differences um, are more apparent when I see these places and talk to people there. Like me being a Californian is a lot different than somebody who's from like the South or the Midwest or New York or Wyoming or Alaska or Hawaii. And yeah, which countries have I been to so far? I've been to 45 countries in the world, 43 US states. I've been to the US, obviously, Canada, both Quebec and Ontario and British Columbia. I've been to Mexico several times, Guatemala, Panama. Um, I've been to Barbados and the Cayman and the Caribbean. I've been to Colombia. That's part of a cruise on the Panama Canal. I'm only there for a day, but I've been there. I've been to Chile, Argentina, Uruguay. Uruguay is probably my favorite place in Latin America, I would say, but that's my extent with Latin America. I've been to Fiji. I've been to Indonesia, to Bali a couple times, mainly for surfing. Um, I've been to Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia and what's and yeah, I'm missing one. India, and I've been to Thailand. I think I already said that. I've been to China, both mainland and Hong Kong. I've been to Japan, and that's Asia. I've been to Turkey. Um, I've been to what's it called? In a lot of Europe. The only place in Africa I've gone to is Morocco. Uh, and then Europe, I've lived in Italy. I've lived in France briefly. Um, I've been to Spain and Portugal and um, San Marino, Vatican City, Malta, Monaco, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Germany, Austria, uh, Czech Republic, or Czechia now, this is called, Hungary, Greece, Croatia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, UK. Yeah, I think that's about it. I have no idea what the total amount of money I spent on all my travels. A lot of it was logistically made sense because I lived in Italy, and so I flew to a lot of the places or took trains from Milan to other places. I lived in Singapore, so I just flew around to a lot of places from there. And so, yeah, I don't really know. And then I'm probably missing some places in Europe. I'm trying to think if I've said them all. No, I think I have, but yeah. And so I made sure to do it in a cost-effective way because I did have a certain budget that I had to. Most of my travels were in my 20s when I was in college or shortly out of college, so I wasn't doing it on unlimited budget by any means. Or I mean, some trips. So um, like the places left that I want to go that I haven't are Brazil. I've never been there. I'd like to go to Israel one day. Um, Egypt, Cyprus, probably Ireland, Poland, and Australia and New Zealand. Like those are what's probably left on my list. And then also East Africa, like Kenya and Tanzania, Zanzibar particularly. I've heard Mozambique is pretty cool to visit, and South Africa if I feel safe enough to go there. So yeah, that's kind of what's left. I'm open to other places too. Like I'd like to see the Netherlands and Belgium as well. And there's other certain regions and countries I've already been to that I need to see. Like I still have 7 states in America. I'd still like to see southern Spain and southern Italy and northern France and Scotland. So yeah, like just because you've been to a country doesn't mean you've done everything there either. So yeah, those are kind of where I would like to go. And yeah, then I know this kind of got a little bit sidetracked, but let me know what your thoughts are on travel. Should I be talking more about travel and geography on the channel, or should I just make a Nick AF where I talk solely about these kind of things? Because as you can tell, I have a lot to talk about when it comes to this stuff. How's the language barrier? Depends where. The hardest language barrier I had to deal with was when I went to Japan. And with countries like that, it's ideally better to travel with when you have a friend who speaks the language. Like if I didn't have a friend who spoke Japanese, I would have had a not as good of a time there. And there's several other countries where that applies. So yeah, and like if you also like, that's the useful thing about learning Spanish, like a basic level, is like if you know English and Spanish, you could basically go everywhere in the Western Hemisphere without really a language barrier, which is a perk. Brazil is the one exception, but yeah. Talk about the economies of the world. and their different approaches. I do that in my economic futures series. I haven't made an economic futures video in a while, like a mainline one about a specific country, but I did a lot of those in 2023 and the first half of 2024, where I broke down certain countries' economic futures, and I go into a lot of those things. And the reason why I'm informed as I am, because most of these countries that I talk about, I've been to, or I know a sizable amount of people from their diasporas. So that's why I am able to talk about these things. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up. I'm hit 2 hours here, and I'm kind of starting to lose my voice. But thank you guys all for watching. Have a happy new year. Those coming to San Francisco, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And yeah, in terms of country system, I prefer the most. It's either the United States or Switzerland. Yeah, those, and Singapore has a pretty good system in terms of economics, but I think it's flawed in terms of other parts of their governance. But yeah, have a happy new year, everybody. And for those in San Francisco, I'll see you tomorrow. For those in Orange County and San Diego, I'll see you in a few weeks. Otherwise, we'll have another of these lives maybe mid-January, or we'll do the Valentine's Day special one in February. But yeah, thanks, Yojo, for joining.